And now for our next guest on the interview, we have writer Darius Cheyenne Smith. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
What do you enjoy most about writing? Are there aspects of the craft that genuinely excite you?
I'd say I enjoy the freedom of writing, and it's kind of the fact that there's really no limit to what you can write, and whatever you put on paper, that goes. It's your story. It's in your head. You don't have to follow any rules for analyzing quotes or anything of that sort. Quite honestly, the first creative writing class I took was in 7th grade, and I just remember when our teacher would assign us writing assignments or whatever it was, I would write these crazy, unrealistic, usually comedic stories, and I just had a blast writing them. And my teacher would always laugh when she would read them. And I just remember every class, because we would share stories every class, and I was always the first one to share, which was probably annoying for the other people, but it was really fun for me. And so that's why when I saw that there was a creative writing class on the list for English this year, I immediately jumped on it because my memories of the last creative writing class that I took, and I just wanted to expand on that and learn more.
What obstacles or frustrations have you experienced in writing? And to what extent have you been able to overcome these obstacles from a physical, emotionally, and spiritual perspective?
Honestly, literary analysis, this is speaking about the past, has been pretty difficult for me. So I took this creative writing class thinking, I'm not gonna have any difficulties, creative writing. But then you start to realize that there's so many elements that go into writing the story, and sometimes emotionally, you have to really dig down deep to write a story that actually means something to you, which is what I was trying to do this year. And I feel like I improved a lot on that. And something that was difficult for me personally was I would always hear Mr. Hathaway telling us, just write what you have in your head and then you'll polish it later. And I always struggled with that because I, for some reason, wanted to write it down the first time exactly how it was supposed to be, which obviously never ended up happening. So just developing the skill to actually just write whatever's coming to your head, and then going back and editing it later was difficult for me. So I'd say that was probably my number one difficulty at the beginning of the year, was being able to just write whatever came to my head. And it was a struggle for me to write things down, and every sentence was, this sentence has to be really good, when in reality that's not at all how it is. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
To what extent have the texts you've studied this year influenced your writing style, and how has your style developed over the years?
All the texts that we've read this year have been really important for me to see different writing styles, because I'm not a really big reader, and so it was good to just see these really, really good stories with their different kind of ways of displaying it. One of my favorites was Old Man and the Sea. I feel like it was the perfect intro to the class because it showed how simple a story can be, yet so complex at the same time, because of this relationship between this old man and the fish, and both of which have never really seen each other, and just kind of how they're relying on each other and they need each other. So just to learn that not every story is going to have all these big words and all these difficult plots and things like that, that you can truly have a story about an old man and a fish, which was really important for me to see that, and so that I was able to kind of relieve myself of trying to write these complex stories and things like that. And then another story that was really important in my development was the the story Your Fathers, Where Are They? And The Prophets, Do They Live Forever by Dave Eggers. Because I think this was the first story that I've ever read that I didn't have to actually like annotate for a grade. So I was, not that annotating is bad, but I was able to literally just read the book, and I wasn't worrying about annotations and like writing down the right things. So it was a really cool experience just to sit down and read this story and see this dialogue that was casual yet complex at the same time, and had this meaningful tone throughout the story that I kind of took to heart. So if I had to say if my style changed, I don't know about that, but my dialogue and my descriptions have grown tremendously throughout the year due to these specific stories and also all the other ones that we've read.
What is the best sentence that you wrote this year?
So my favorite sentence I wrote this year comes from the second semester story that I wrote. So the sentence is, although it was hard to let go, he knew it needed to happen. It was time to shed the past and prosper in the present. So although this isn't necessarily the most complex sentence, but the meaning for me was very important because this whole story kind of represents high school. And this specific part in the story is about this protagonist choosing this first level path, basically, which was freshman year for me, and he's worried and he's scared, and he wants to go back to the old life he had. And this sentence comes at the end of the story, which basically reassures him that he's in the right spot and there's nothing to worry about. Which is kind of like what you have to do in high school. You know, although you're scared, you have fears about high school. In order to grow as a person and learn, you have to be open to the future and prosper in the present. And that was really important to me as a person. So it was really cool to be able to end the story with that, with such a meaningful sentence to me.
To what extent has your engagement in the writing process influence your outlook and perceptiveness in daily life?
It's actually an interesting question because I would kind of feel when we had a story due or a journal extension or something, I felt like I would kind of be more observant of the people around me to try to get ideas for the stories that I was writing. So to answer the question, I guess not always. It's not always affecting my perspectiveness. I think to a certain extent it is constantly, but on a more grand scale, it's when I'm writing these stories, I'm looking for more ideas. And we actually had this in the first semester. We had a lecture called Real World Observations, which was basically us observing 3 different people and then writing a story about one of them, which I didn't really think that I would use it for later, but like I said, I kind of did subconsciously. And then actually for my later stories in the second semester, sometimes I would literally just take my computer out and observe people during like free block, usually sometimes lunch, but mostly free block, and just look at people, as weird as it sounds, or things, and get ideas for my stories, if it was usually starting a story or ending a story. So like for example, in my final story that I wrote this year, which I just referenced in after the last question, I was sitting up in the loft with my computer open, looking outside, and that's where I got the idea for the tree at the end of the story with the leaves falling, that tree directly outside of the loft. So I mean, that was a really important part of my story. So I guess you could say I kind of do change my perspective to write these stories, because you can get a lot of really cool influence from literally just looking at the world.
To what extent has your writing process developed over the course of the year?
As I said before, it was kind of difficult for me to just write something. I wanted to like think about it before. At the beginning of the year, a little too much thinking went into it. So I feel like as the year went on, I would kind of like picture the protagonist in my head, and I would kind of want to think of what they looked like generally, and then think of a situation I wanted to put them in, and then I would start writing the story, and then I would get an idea of where I wanted to go with it. Sometimes I had an ending, sometimes I didn't. That would just come up as I was writing. But I think my writing style overall became like a ton more efficient because I would draft, like I would write more down. So then after the first draft, I would probably do about four edits or 5 full edits of just like taking bad stuff out, changing things around like that, which was a lot more efficient.
To what extent are you more confident as a writer as a consequence of your work this year?
I feel like I'm much more confident now in my ability to write, not just short stories, but just writing in general. Now that I've had this experience with creative writing, there's a lot of tools that I can take to analytical writing or writing really anything, which is really cool. And the best part, I feel like my final semester 2 my final semester 2 short story was my best work, which is a really great feeling to have, that I've actually like improved. So yeah, I'm definitely gonna take these tools I've learned, and I feel like I've grown a lot as a writer this year.
Do you plan to continue writing stories in the future?
Yeah, I definitely would like to continue writing as a hobby. It's kind of a fun way to get rid of stress, or just sit down, and if you're looking to relax, it's cool to just be able to write a story and see where it goes. So I think I'll definitely continue writing in the future, just whenever, because I really enjoy like the factor of writing a story. It's like you don't really know where it's gonna go. Even if you kind of think you have an idea when it begins, you could literally take it anywhere you want, which is really cool. So I definitely love to continue writing.
Do you prefer a traditional high school English class or a creative writing class similar to the one you took this year?
I'd say creative writing, because there's less rules, quite honestly. I obviously know that analytical writing has its place and it's really important, and I didn't really think too much of creative writing before. I didn't really think anything of it at all, but now they're kind of on equal grounds for me, and I just prefer the working environment of a creative writing class, just the relaxed vibe of it. And you're being judged based off your creativity, which I feel like is one of my strong suits, so I definitely enjoy creative writing classes.
What was your favorite memory in English this year?
My favorite memory this year in English, there's a ton of awesome moments of just having fun, writing stories, but I'd have to say my favorite memory was the day that Mr. Hathaway pulled up a picture of a dog being sprayed by a hose, and he told us to write a sentence about what was going on in the picture. And when he was reading in the class, we were all like dying laughing because they were all so funny. And that was not only our best sentence writing session, but I feel like it was our best moment as a class because of the energy that was in the room, and we were all kind of having a lot of fun, not taking ourselves too seriously. So I definitely have to say, out of all the wonderful moments that we had this year, that would definitely be my favorite one.